Today, we are digging into one of the most incredible, most complicated stories of the 20th century, India's fight for freedom. Now, this was not just some straightforward battle against a colonial power. Nope, it was this intense, messy, and often conflicted process of trying to create a single national identity out of millions of different communities, ideas, and dreams. So let's get right into it.
And that really is the big question here, isn't it? Because even though the goal was freedom, what that freedom actually looked like and how to even get there, well, that was up for debate. It was this massive challenge that shaped the entire movement.
Our story really kicks into high gear in the years right after 1919. The First World War left behind a pretty brutal situation. Taxes were jacked up, prices for everyday things basically doubled, and forced recruitment into the army out in the villages created a ton of anger. And if that wasn't bad enough, crops failed and a devastating flu epidemic killed millions. So any hope that things would get better after the war, that was gone. The stage was set for a new kind of struggle.
All right, so first up, let's look at how this idea of a single nation even started to form. And the key ingredient? It was the shared experience of oppression under colonialism.
And this is the most important thing to get. The feeling of being oppressed by the British, that provided a common bond, something that could tie all these different groups together. But, and this is a big but, every single group felt the effects of colonialism differently. Their day-to-day experiences were worlds apart, and so were their ideas about what freedom would actually bring. This tension is right at the heart of our story.
And right into this moment of crisis walks a new leader, Mahatma Gandhi. He'd just returned from South Africa in 1915, and he brought with him a totally revolutionary idea for how to fight back.
Gandhi called this idea satyagraha. At its core, it was all about the power of truth and the need to search for it. He argued that if your cause was true, if you were in the right, you didn't need physical force to fight the oppressor. Now, this wasn't passive resistance. He saw it as an active struggle, a kind of pure soul force that was meant to appeal to the conscience of the enemy, not to destroy them.
Gandhi truly believed that this philosophy, this dharma of nonviolence, could be the thing to unite all Indians. It was a moral and spiritual weapon for what was ultimately a political battle. And boy, would it change the course of history.
So you have this incredible idea of satyagraha, but how do you actually apply it to an entire empire? Well, Gandhi had an answer for that, a strategy he called non-cooperation.
The logic here was actually pretty simple but totally revolutionary. Years earlier, Gandhi had made this powerful argument. British rule was only established in India and only survived because Indians cooperated with it. So he reasoned if Indians just refused to cooperate, British rule would collapse. He thought it could happen in a year.
And this wasn't just a vague idea. He laid out a clear, step-by-step plan. It would start with symbolic things like giving back government-awarded titles. Then it would escalate to boycotting all the pillars of the British administration. We're talking schools, courts, police, the army, everything. And finally, a boycott of foreign goods. It was a plan to systematically pull the plug on the system that kept the empire running.
So, as the non-cooperation movement kicks off in 1921, everyone rallies to this call for Swaraj, or self-rule. But here's where things get really complicated. That one powerful word meant very different things to different people.
Let's start in the cities. The movement really took off with the middle class, and for them, Swaraj was mostly about challenging the institutions of British power.
And they went all in. Thousands of students and teachers just walked out of government-run schools. Lawyers gave up their practices. The economic impact was huge. People built these massive bonfires of foreign goods, and the value of imported cloth was literally cut in half in just 1 year, as people started wearing only Indian-made cloth.
But, okay, let's leave the cities for a minute and head out into the countryside, because it is a completely different story out there. For the peasants, Swaraj wasn't about council elections or foreign cloth. It was about basic survival.
See, their struggle was against landlords who demanded outrageous rents and often forced them into unpaid labor, a system known as begar. So for them, Swaraj meant an end to this immediate daily oppression. In many places, they used Gandhi's name to justify all sorts of things, like refusing to pay taxes and even looting markets.
And then you've got another group, the plantation workers. And for them, Swaraj had an even more direct, and you could say literal meaning.
You have to understand, under a law at the time, these workers in Assam weren't allowed to leave the tea gardens without permission, which they rarely got. So for them, freedom literally meant the right to go home. When they heard about the movement, thousands of them just defied the authorities and left, because they believed that Gandhi Raj was coming and that everyone would be given land back in their own villages.
Okay, so you've got all these different groups, all with their own ideas of freedom. The movement desperately needed a single powerful symbol that could unite everyone. In 1930, Gandhi found it, and he used it to launch the civil disobedience movement with an absolutely iconic act of defiance. Just picture this. Gandhi and 78 of his most trusted volunteers marched for 24 days straight. They covered 240 miles to get to the coastal town of Dandi. All along the way, thousands of people came out to hear him speak, and he urged them to peacefully defy the British. This wasn't just a march, it was a masterpiece of political theater.
So why salt? This was the stroke of genius. Salt was something everybody used, whether you were rich or poor. The government's tax on it and its total monopoly over making it perfectly symbolized just how oppressive British rule was. So by breaking the salt law, Gandhi was challenging the entire empire with a single act that every single Indian could understand.
But even as the Salt March created this amazing moment of unity, it couldn't magically fix all the fractures lying underneath. So for our final section, let's look at the groups who are still a bit apprehensive, who are on the sidelines of the mainstream nationalist movement.
For instance, many Dalit organizations had limited participation. Leaders like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar worried, and for good reason, that their community's social struggles would just be ignored in a Swaraj dominated by high-caste Hindus. They pushed for things like separate electorates to guarantee they'd have political power. In a similar way, many Muslim political organizations started to feel alienated from the Congress Party, fearing that in a future India, their culture and identity as a minority would be lost under a Hindu majority.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, the fight for freedom absolutely helped forge the idea of India as a nation, but that unity was always fragile. The movement was this constant process of negotiation, of pushing and pulling, where you'd see these incredible high points of unity, often followed by periods of real disunity and conflict.
In the end, what you see is a nation that is definitely emerging, with so many different voices all crying out for freedom from colonial rule. But the real challenge then, and the question that would echo for decades to come, was this: could all of those diverse voices ever truly be unified into one?